Who jumps in?
Okay, let's see. Great. We see people coming in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be introducing 3 of the latest AI technologies today. We have Amazon Code Whisperer, GitHub Pilot, and OpenAI ChatGPT. For those who don't know, my name is Alex, and I will be your MC during this session. Before we begin, as people come in, I just want to go over some housekeeping first. During the webinar, everyone's microphones will be muted. However, this webinar, it's formatted to just be an open discussion. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to dedicate some time at the end to answer them. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded currently, and we will be sending this to everyone via email after the session. So with that said, as people continue to come in, I would just like to take some time to introduce and give some background on our speaker for today's webinar, Ken Kruger. So for those who don't know, Ken has over 30 years of experience in an IT career that has spanned the eras of the mainframe, client server, and web. He has been a software developer, project leader, project manager, scrum master, and instructor. He has held IT positions in telecommunications, finance, real estate, retail, utilities, shipping, hospitality, and software development. Ken's areas of expertise include Java, Spring, SQL, web development, cloud, and related technologies. He holds certifications in PMP, AWS, Java, and Scrum Master, and has been an ExitCertified instructor with us since 2015. So as you can see here on our first slide, we do have Ken's email. Please feel free to jot that down. I'll also share it in the chat for everyone. But with that, I'm excited to welcome Ken.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I feel kind of old since you mentioned that I've done like mainframe programming. I guess I have to admit that. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm looking at the participants list. I see some people coming in that I recognize from prior classes. So welcome to you. Thanks for coming out. So I think this is going to be a really exciting presentation. This is on AI-assisted programming, basically. Folks, if you have not already done so, Alexandra kind of mentioned this, but I'd like you to copy down my email address. And the reason I'd like you to copy down my email address is because I have a feeling that after the presentation is over and after you've had some time to think about it, you might have some thoughts or some suggestions for me for perhaps improving this presentation in the future. I was just talking with Alexandra about this. I'm thinking that I might revisit this topic 8 months or a year from now, just to see how technology has changed. Since these are all this is all very new technology, and we're very much in an infancy. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see where this is going to go, since things are changing so much. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. This presentation is going to be an introduction mainly about some of the current tools that are out there. And I'm going to try to make the undercurrent about not the tools themselves, but an attempt to get you familiar with a new way of working with these new tools. So it's going to be very heavy on the demos, and probably half of the time is going to be demos once I get started here. Now, what this presentation is I'm not going to try to anoint a winner and say, oh, this tool is best or anything like that, or rank them. I'm also not going to try to give an exhaustive comparison of all the different features because, truth be told, I don't know. I don't think I've found out all the different features of all these different tools yet. That being said, there's not these tools don't really compare with each other in terms of the features, but it's more of the quality of the suggestions. So, and I've found that these kind of change on a day-to-day basis anyway. So before we get too far, I would like to make this statement here. If you're attending because you think your job might be in jeopardy, rest assured you're going to be fine. And the reason I say this is because you and I you've probably heard sensational stories in the just popular media, probably coming up on your phone's news feed that says, oh, AI is going to make it so we don't need programmers anymore. I think by the time we're done with this presentation, you're going to see why that's not true, or at least it's not true now, and it's not going to be true for a while. And one of the main reasons why is it's a question of liability. So it's a question of who is responsible for the program code. And none of the tools that I'm going to show you are going to volunteer to take liability or responsibility for what's generated. And that right there is the deal breaker, right? What's the difference between a doctor and a nurse? Who you sue, okay? Who do you sue when something goes wrong? Okay, what's the difference between a lawyer and a paralegal? Who you sue. Okay, so there still needs to be someone to take responsibility to provide the wringable neck for when things don't go to plan, and that's you and me. Okay, so these are the tools that we're going to take a look at. I'm going to start with Amazon Code Whisperer because I spend most of my time nowadays teaching Amazon Web Services, and so I've kind of had to jump in and learn this tool first. And then I learned about Copilot, which is rapidly gaining a really good reputation. And then just to contrast this with another tool that's commonly available, ChatGPT. There's also something called Code Geeks. I have a few slides on it, but I don't think we're going to get to that tool. And I think that that's fine because by the time I get to that point in the presentation, you'll have kind of understood what's the same and what's different with all of these different tools. So let's go ahead and start with the one that I started with. This is Code Whisperer. So Code Whisperer is from AWS. It is called a generative AI tool. Now, all of the tools that I'm going to go through are classified as generative AI. It uses artificial intelligence to generate code for you. Now, one of the distinguishing factors between these different tools is how are they trained behind the scenes. Now, if you look at the Code Whisperer documentation, they say that it is trained on Amazon and open source code, and that's all they say about that. My interpretation of this is that they train it on internal Amazon code bases and selected open source code bases that are not protected by any type of restricted licensing agreement. But my interpretation could be incorrect. Now, one of the big things you have to think about with these different tools are the IDEs that are supported, because all of these tools are designed to help you and I when you're working in an integrated development environment. All of the tools that I'm going to show you have really good support for everybody's favorite editor nowadays, Visual Studio Code. Also, well supported is the JetBrains IDEs. So JetBrains are things like IntelliJ, PyCharm, and things like that that are related to different languages. Because Code Whisperer is from Amazon Web Services, it also supports kind of the built-in editors that are seen in AWS itself. The languages supported are pretty rich. You can see the list here, but when you take a look at this list, you'll probably see your favorite language and some of the ones that you'd like to use. But when I look at this, I see what's missing. As an AWS advocate, one of the things that I work with all the time is CloudFormation. I work with the System Manager automation documents. I work with step functions documents, and none of those are represented here, which is kind of ironic from my perspective, because some of the other tools that I'm going to show you today actually support these internal AWS formats, whereas the AWS provided tool does not. So that's a head scratcher. All right, now, one of the things that you need to be aware of with all of these tools is while you're using them, they're going to be actively gathering intelligence on you. Specifically, what these tools do is they gather information about the code. They take a look at your cursor position in the IDE that you're using. They grab a bunch of code, lines above and lines below your cursor position, and they send that into a central place in an API call so that the algorithm can basically come up with suggestions. So it's taking a look at the code snippets, it's looking at the comments, the cursor position, and things like that. Okay. Now, Code Whisperer may store this information. It may store the code and it may store suggestions, but you can opt out of this if you are using the free tier. If you're using the professional tier, which I'll get to in a moment, they guarantee that none of this is going to be stored. Okay, so you just have to think about that. A couple of interesting features. Again, I didn't want to dive in and compare all the features, but just some interesting things. It doesn't require an AWS account. So everything else I do in all of the AWS training classes that I teach, everything requires an AWS account, but not this. This requires an AWS Builder account. And actually, I think we're seeing a trend there in AWS where more stuff is actually requiring a Builder account, not an AWS account. Another really interesting thing that this does is open source attribution. So I'll show you an example of this. I'm pretty sure an example will come up where if the suggested code is substantially the same as code in a public repository that is under a license, Code Whisperer will warn you about that so that you can provide proper attribution and correctly credit the source project. Another really interesting thing that Code Whisperer does that the others don't is something called a security scan. You press a button and it will scan your code, let you know if there's a security risk. As far as how much it costs, the individual tier that I use is free. There's also a professional tier that will cost about $19 per user per month per active user. So this gives you, looking at my notes here, it gives you an organizational license, policy management, it gives you more security scans per month, 500 per month as opposed to 50. And you can also sign in with Identity Center, and they guaranteed to never store any of your code. So let me go ahead and provide you with a demo here. Now, my demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo these 3 tools using the same coding problem. I'm just going to do it 3 different ways. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code because everybody likes Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to work with Python because it's kind of a common language. One thing I want to tell you right from the beginning is I'm not a Python developer. I'm really not. I'm a Java developer. I've spent the last 20 years working with Java. I'm kind of an amateur when it comes to Python. And that's part of the demo, because one of the strengths that these tools offer is they can actually help you learn another language a lot better. Another thing I want to say from the very beginning is, whenever I do one of these presentations, I always practice beforehand, as you can imagine, to make sure that my demo is going to go well. I have no idea what's going to happen. I really don't, because every time I practice this, the tools behave differently because they have non-determinism kind of baked into them. So fingers crossed that I don't, that my demo goes okay. Now, when I do my demo here, I want you to pay attention to the keystrokes. I'm going to try to highlight this as much as I can, but I might forget. When you see me accept a suggestion, I'm using the tab key. Sometimes I might have multiple suggestions. You can toggle through these with the left and right keys. You can reject a suggestion by hitting escape or backspace, and a lot of times you can just keep typing. And one of the interesting things about Code Whisperer is it has a wake up feature. I use this one a lot with Code Whisperer. It just kind of goes to sleep, so you can kind of kick it and say, with Alt-C. Okay, so let's go in and take a look at some code here. All right, so first of all, I have Visual Studio Code loaded up here. And the first thing I wanted to show you is the extensions that I have loaded. For all of these, you have to load some extensions. So the first one that I'm going to work with is the AWS Toolkit, which is going to be for Code Whisperer. Before I move off of here, notice that I have one called Easy Code for ChatGPT that's coming later. There's one for Code Geeks, which I probably won't have time to get into, and then one for Copilot. Now, all of these happen to be disabled right now. The one thing that I found doesn't work well is if you have multiple of these tools active at the same time to kind of fight with each other. So the first thing I'm going to do is enable the AWS extension. Once you enable the AWS extension, you can see here in my developer tools, there's an AWS Explorer here. It says I'm connected with a builder ID. I'm not going to walk you through the sign-in process. It's fairly predictable. And you can see that my Code Whisperer, it says pause auto suggestion. That means auto suggestions is turned on right now. All right, so let's take a look at some code here. All right, take a look at my editor here. I have a little Python file, and you can see that I have some functions in here dealing with dates, is weekday, is later, things like that. Now, one thing I need to tell you right from the beginning is the reason I'm starting with some existing code is these tools don't do really well with a blank editor, with the exception of ChatGPT. Code Whisperer and Copilot, they like to be able to see the context of what you're working on. So right from the beginning, Code Whisperer is going to be aware that I'm working with Python, that I'm working with dates. And when I ask it to provide some code for me, it's going to have more wisdom about the context. That's going to make my demo go a lot smoother. Now, there's a few ways that I can prompt Code Whisperer to give me some code suggestions, but one of the easiest way is to create a comment. So what I'd like it to do is I'd like it to create a function. Now, as soon as I start typing, look what happens here. It's come up with a suggestion for me for the rest of my my comment. If I like this, I'll hit tab, but I don't. It's asking me to return true if the current date is a weekend. You can tell why it's making that suggestion because there's an isWeekday function up here. So it says, oh, you want one for weekend? Man, that might be what you want based on the context. Thank you, but no. So I'll just keep typing. Create a function which calculates. How about this? Calculates the number of days between two given dates. That's a lot closer to what I had in mind. Although I want to do something a little bit different. Calculates the absolute number of days between two given dates. Okay. Now, why did I say absolute? Well, I'm a software developer, and I understand the difference between a difference and an absolute difference. I always want a positive number here. So this is one reason why I say that your job is safe. It would take a developer or someone familiar with basic math to kind of understand to ask that. Otherwise, you might get some code generated that is not what you expect. I'll go ahead and hit enter here, and then look at the suggestion that comes up. Def days between date 1, date 2. All right, we're off to a good start here. So I'll go ahead and hit tab. All right. And then I'll hit enter, and let's see what it comes up with. All right, so it says return date 2 minus date 1 days. Well, it's got the days part, but it hasn't got the absolute part. And you can see here that it's prompting me for a couple, it looks like I have a couple different suggestions here. So let me hit the right arrow, and that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted right there, the absolute number of days. So I could take that suggestion and I would be done. But that's not exactly what I want now that I think about it. What I'd like to do is I'd like to calculate the absolute number of days, then print out a message and then return it. So in order to do that, I need to do a little bit of prompt engineering here. So let me do this. Calculate the absolute number of days between the two given dates. Let's see what it comes up with. Okay, it's still saying return. You see that? That's not what I want. Okay, so it kind of knows what I want, but it's not quite there. Let me help it out by putting in a variable declaration. Delta equals, that's not what I want. And left and right is not helping me out here. Okay, so how can I do this? How can I do this? How about this? How about define a variable to store the, how about this? Store the absolute number of days. Oh, isn't that interesting? Okay, let's try that. Oh, I don't have a space there. Enter. Okay, now it's just kind of stuck in this weird mode. So let me just get rid of this. Code Whisperer just isn't behaving right now. And you see this, it's stuck. It's like it's decided it's going to go to sleep for me. Luckily, there's a keystroke that I can use to kind of prompt it. It's Alt-C. So you can see it says waiting for Code Whisperer. It says days equals 0. No, that's not what I want. What else you got? Looping through the dates? No, I don't want to loop through anything. There's nothing to loop through here. I'm not sure why it thinks I need to loop through. To store the calculated number of days between the two dates. And it's stuck again. How about diff? Maybe this diff equals. No, it doesn't have it. Okay, told you I didn't know what was going to happen when I did this demo. Every time I've done this practice through this before, it's figured out that I wanted to use the absolute function. So let me see if I can prompt it here. How about that? All right, so I happen to know enough about Python to kind of prompt it there. Okay, but it's very non-deterministic. I've practiced this little demo here several times. I've never seen that behavior where it just got completely lost. Must have been something with the way I phrased it. Okay, now it wants to return the difference. How about this? That's not what I want. I want to print a useful message to the user. Okay, what does useful message mean to you? I know what it means to me. That's exactly what I had in mind. How about that? How could it be so far off on the first one, but be spot on this one? That's exactly what I wanted. Tell me the number of days with the input dates. And let's see if it can guess what I want to do next. Return the calculated number of days. That's exactly what I want. Beautiful. Okay, so it took a little while to get there, but ultimately it generated the code. And here's something else. I told you that I'm really not a Python developer. Here's something else. You see this little F here? It's like, oh, I wasn't aware that that was something that you could do in Python. Now, as an experienced software developer, I can look at it. I can tell exactly what it's doing. It's formatting the string and let me put in the placeholders. And it's like, oh, that's neat. See, I didn't know that about Python. Okay. I'd probably have to sit through a long, boring tutorial in order to figure that out. So that's really nice. Okay. All right. Next thing, let's make some test logic. So over here, I have a little PyTest file that I've created for the existing functions. Let's see if we can have it test. What was the name of the function here? It was the days between. Create a function to test the days between function. All right, test days between. Looks like it's off to a good start. Except, here's what I'd like to do. How about this? Create a parameterized test. See where it's going? Test for the days between function. Let's see if it knows what I'm talking about here. I'm trying to use the tab key to accept the suggestion, but unfortunately tab sometimes means tab. Okay, and I hit enter too quickly. So now it's stuck. So I have to hit Alt-C to kind of wake it up here. All right, so it's got, I think that's what I want. I think that's how these things work. All right, it's got some sample dates here. That's exactly what I had in mind. A from and a to date, a few examples here. I'm just hitting enter and tab at this point. Okay, I think that's enough to make my point. And so I'll go ahead and close the bracket here. And let's see if it knows what I want to do next. Assert days between, that's exactly what I wanted. Okay, great. So let's cross our fingers and see how this works. I'll go ahead and run PyTest here. All right, and so I have a couple of problems here. Let's see if I can scroll this up and see what the problem is. In test days between function no argument date one. No argument date one. I'm not really sure what it's talking about there. Date one. I see date one. Parameterized date one, date two, expected. And I'm not really sure what's going on here. Let me try this. Let me try to regenerate this. I didn't see anything wrong with what was provided, but let's see what it does here. Assert days between. Okay, I didn't see what was wrong before, but I ran this again and it's fine. Collected 8 items and the the test passed. So good news. Now, this is actually interesting for a couple reasons. First, the last few times that I've actually practiced this, some of the date ranges that it came up with and the expected values were incorrect. And actually, this time is one of the few times it actually has produced correct data. So that's actually interesting that the test worked the first time. Okay. So I wasn't able to kind of demonstrate that. Another thing that I wasn't able to demonstrate here is sometimes the test code looks essentially the same as open source code on GitHub someplace. And so when that happens, Code Whisperer will warn you, and it will prompt you that you need to provide an attribution for this code that's under an MIT license or something like that. So so anyway, this time it didn't do that. The code must have been a little bit different. Okay. So let's go ahead and put that away, and we'll move on to Copilot next. And first, let's go through a little bit about Copilot. All right. So Code Whisperer is great. Copilot from GitHub is actually a really popular one right now. So it is another generative AI solution. It uses OpenAI technology behind the scenes, OpenAI codecs. They come right out and tell you that it is trained on GitHub public repository code. Now, this is good news and it's bad news, which I'll explain in just a second. The IDE is supported, really good support for Visual Studio Code. It also supports regular Visual Studio, which is nice if you're a .NET person. And it's got good support for the JetBrains IDEs. It also supports Vim and NeoVim if you're into that. The languages supported, any code that is appearing in public repositories in GitHub. Now, varying support means that GitHub comes out and they say right away, all the different programming languages are not equally represented in GitHub. GitHub has more JavaScript projects than anything else. And if you're coding in something like JavaScript, you can expect really rich support. If you're coding in something like Haskell or Smalltalk or something like that, I'm sure there's some support out there, but you can count on a different experience. So it really comes down to the richness of the experience. As Code Whisperer did, Copilot is going to collect data on you, specifically prompts and suggestions. So the prompts are basically, the prompts are the context information. It's basically your code and comments sent to GitHub. The suggestions are what it offers in response and whether you accept it or not. So this data is used to improve Copilot. It is retained by default. However, you can disable this if you want, okay? You can also ask GitHub to delete past prompts and suggestions. However, that requires a support request. Interesting features. Unlike Code Whisperer, it's going to outright block suggestions that match public code. Code Whisperer will warn you if what it generates is substantially the same as public code, and it will specifically if it's under a license like an Apache license or something like that. There's also something fun that they just added, an online chat feature, so you can kind of talk to Copilot. I only noticed this last week, so it's fairly new. As far as the licensing and the billing, you need to accept GitHub's terms for additional products and features. And I would imagine that probably half the people on the call right now have probably already done this at some point in their career. The individual tier is $10 a month. There is a 30-day free trial, which I highly suggest that you try out. And there's a discount of $100 per year, save you $20 on a yearly basis. There is a business subscription for $19 per seat per month. The business subscription is going to make sure that the prompts and suggestions are not retained. It also provides organizational-wide policy management, and you can administer the access to individuals and teams. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a demo. Same demo as before, same code as before, same editor and language as before, but different tool. So I'm going to enable CodePilot and disable Code Whisperer. To accept a suggestion, that's going to be the same as Code Whisperer, tab. The next and previous is alt bracket, which I always forget. So if I stumble over that, you got to remind me what it is. To reject, the same as before, you say escape. There is no wake up. There is no wake up feature, but there's something that might even be better. There's a way that you can get a tab of new suggestions by saying Control Enter, which is pretty cool. I'll kind of show you that. All right. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to disable my AWS toolkit, and I'm going to go to CodePilot and enable it. Now, my toolkit says reload required, so fine, I hit the reload button. And my Copilot is no longer in the list. Okay, fine. Now, let's go and take a look at some code. This is the same code as before. I just copied it to another place. Let's see how Copilot works with this. Now, first of all, take a look at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You see this little icon down here? I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. It's either a mole or a monkey or something like that, but that's going to be my helper here. So let's go ahead and do essentially the same thing that I did before with Code Whisperer. Create a function to return a number of days in a given month. Okay, so you can see it's suggesting, it knows I want to do something with dates, but it doesn't know what. Let me see, let's try to do this. Let me try to be very articulate about exactly what I want as far as the calculation and the message. To calculate the absolute, oh, you see I misspelled calculate. Let's see how it does. The absolute number of days difference between two given dates, comma, print a useful message. Again, what does useful mean to you? And return, let's see, what did it say? Return the result. Okay. I press enter and, oh, look at this. If date, days. Okay, that's an interesting suggestion, but I wonder, that's not exactly what I had in mind. So let's see if I hit alt bracket here. This is the bracket on my keyboard right over the enter key, and I have the alt key. This looks closer. Okay, it's got the difference, the print, and returning the difference. I like it. I like it. I think this is what I want. So I'll hit tab. Looking at this, I like it. I think that's what I want. Now notice that the print statement is not the same. It didn't use the F character the same. The suggestion is a little bit different. So that's kind of interesting. But this is good enough for my needs here. So I'll go ahead and save my work. Let's pop over to the test logic, and let's see if we can generate some test logic here. But I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to, actually, let's do this. I'll just say, create a parameterized test for the days difference function. That's exactly what I had in mind. But I'm going to hit the Control Enter, and I'm going to show you this interesting feature that is available here in Copilot. You see the monkey is spinning down here, or the mole, or whatever that character is. What it's going to do is it's going to come up with up to 10 suggestions for code that I could use here. All right, so you can see it's got the parameterized test thing down. This is interesting. It just kind of tailed off halfway through. All right, so there's a few different suggestions here. I can compare these, and I can just kind of take a look at which one that I want. Just glancing at these, I'm not really sure which one that I would like. This one's kind of interesting because this one has some longer date ranges in it. So I think I'm going to grab this one. So I'm going to accept solution number 5 here. Okay. All right. Now, obviously, this is in an incomplete state here. So let me do this. I'll delete this. And okay, that's not exactly what I'd like. I'd like you to go ahead and just close the bracket there. And it's not taking my suggestion. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this and see if it figures it out. Yep, now it did. So as long as that comma was there, it says, oh, you want more suggestions, right? Test days difference, boy, that's exactly what I want. That's amazing. All right, we'll save it. And let's run, I think I'm in the right directory, right? Let's run PyTest and see the result. And that happened to work out perfectly, which is kind of disappointing because I was hoping to show you, again, this is interesting. Both of my tools that I demonstrated happen to have generated accurate test data. One of the things that I've always seen when I've practiced this demo is the test data, the ranges have always included errors. And so that was going to be one of the points of my presentation, is that you and I still have to take a look at this code and make sure that it's quality code. But you can kind of, I think I can still make that point, because one of the things that I'm interested in a test like this is, how does my days difference function deal with date ranges that are longer than 30 days, longer than 90 days, longer than 365 days, date ranges that include a leap year. As a software developer, those are the kind of things that I want to have in my test. And you can see that it didn't actually put that in. So if I had a little bit more time, I would go back and say, generate larger test ranges and things like that. But I think you guys can kind of get the idea of this, right? Another interesting feature that you have here in Copilot, before I leave it behind, is there is a little chat feature here. And so I've got some test logic here. So I can say something, please explain this code. Okay, and it says, oh, this is a test function, da, 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 da. Okay, so you can see this is very chat GPT-ish. It's very much an essay to be turned into your English teacher back at school. How about this? I've never tried this before. Cross my finger, I'm going to see if this works. Create a parameterized test to replace the highlighted code. Ooh, let's see if this works. I swear I've never tried this before. Look at that. How about that? It's got a nice parameterized test there. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So if I want to go with this code right here, look at this little button right here, insert at cursor, boom. Now it's bringing in this import stuff, which I don't need, but that's easy enough to delete. And wow, look at that. That's beautiful. Oh, and I also have this little litter down here. So I don't need that. That was because I didn't highlight the whole thing. So that's another use case for these tools. Help me refactor some existing code. Help me generate some test code for this legacy code that's been sitting out here for 10, 15 years and nobody understands. So, wow, that's a really exciting possibility. Okay. All righty. So that is Copilot. Pretty neat, I think. But it's not free. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is compare this to ChatGPT. So ChatGPT, of course, is the killer app that's kind of taken the world by storm in 2023. It was, and still is, intended as a general purpose language model. It is not intended for programming. However, programming is one of the things that it does understand. It understands to generate simple coding examples. It's also really good, I've found, at explaining error messages. In the short time that I've been using it, I've been working with, experimenting with things, making classroom demos, and I get some strange error, and I'll just go to ChatGPT and say, what does this mean? Rather than going to Stack Overflow. And I get a pretty good explanation, and I get it fast. So that's really nice. The IDEs supported really depend on the plugin that you're using. Now, ChatGPT, as far as I know, doesn't have an official plugin for Visual Studio Code. When I went out to Visual Studio Code and looked at the extensions, there were at least 10 different extensions for ChatGPT. So I just picked up one called EasyCode. Now, I don't know. I don't know if this is the best one or how it compares feature to feature to the other ones. I just tried it out, seemed to work. That's what my demo is based on. The supported languages, like Copilot, virtually anything, because it's a large language model. Your licensing and billing, the free plan is free. ChatGPT does have a plus plan for $20 a month, which gives you the latest plugin. I'm using the latest model. I'm using the last model. I also should point out that the plugin that I'm using, this EasyCode, actually requires a separate account. I had to sign up for an account with EasyCode. And there's actually nothing directly associated with my credentials that I'm using for ChatGPT. So let's pop back over to my editor here. And first of all, let me clean up some things, go back to my extensions. Let me enable the EasyCode plugin, but I need to disable, actually, I think I can do it here. I think I can just disable globally. Yeah, if I just click on the little icon, I can disable that globally. And let me make sure that that shows up here in the list. You know what? It's not showing up in the list. Let me make sure that it's really disabled. Bear with me just a second. Yeah, it didn't really disable. So I'll hit the reload button here. Okay, so a couple things have changed here. My AWS toolkit is long gone because that's disabled. Also, the little chat for Copilot is gone. And now I have this EasyCode panel, which I'll show you in just a second. Moving over here to ChatGPT. So here's my date logic. And let me open up the EasyCode. Now, the EasyCode is going to be it's going to be fairly similar to what you saw with the chat feature in Copilot, because it's not quite as integrated directly into the editor as the others. At least this particular plugin is not. But what I can do is I can ask my question right here. So let me try to state the exact same requirement that I did just a moment ago. Create a function to calculate, why can't I spell today? Calculate the absolute number of days between two given input dates. Print a useful message. Again, what does useful mean? And return. All right, let's see what it does. All right, now it's printing out a whole essay here. Again, I kind of think that this is designed for students who have a requirement to turn in an essay to their instructor in a computer science class. And so here you can see the function, and right away there's something here I don't like. These two lines right here. Again, I don't know too much about Python, but that looks like string conversion logic to me. I think that it thinks that the input value, since Python's loosely typed, I think it thinks that it could be a string and it needs to be formatted into an actual date. So that's not exactly what I want. It can actually, relax and just assume that this is a date. So let me do that. It also gives me some nice information about how you use this, which is great. So let me ask it to fix it. Please revise the code. I always say please when I'm talking to ChatGPT. I don't know why. This is just something I've started doing. It's so polite. I feel like I need to be polite back. But anyway, please revise the code to assume that the input dates are actual dates, no string conversion needed. All right, that's a little bit cleaner. Okay. It gives me an example of how to use that. And I like it. So there, in order to get this into my editor, there's a little button here to say insert code. And that is the extent of the integration with the editor, at least as far as I've found with this plugin right here. There might be other plugins that work a little bit better. By the way, if you guys are aware of other plugins that work with ChatGPT better, that's why I want you to have my email address. It's in the chat window right now. Just send it to me, and next time I do this demo, I'll revise it. Okay, so I like it. Let's save the work, and let's pop over to my test function right here, and let's do the same thing that I did with the other tools. Easy code. Create a parameterized test for what was the name of the function again? Calculate days. Calculate days function. I'd also, back to our discussion we were having just a moment ago, I'd like to make sure that the test dates include like ranges in excess of 30 days and 90 days and leap year ranges. So be sure to generate test data ranges which exceed 30, 90, and 365 days. Include some leap years in the test data. Haha, let's see what it does. Make this a little bit wider. Okay. All right, so it's definitely got, so it's got a parameterized test, that's good. It's got some larger date ranges, 365, 366, 1461. Not exactly what I had in mind, but pretty impressive for a good start. And I have the test here. Let's go ahead and copy this code in. I don't need the imports because they're already at the top of my file. Let me move this panel back. That looks pretty good. Let me save this. ChatGPT and PyTest. All right, got a little problem here. Let's see. Let's go up to the first error. Oh no, can't go that far. Actually, let me do this. Okay, it looks like datetime object has no attribute date. Datetime has no attribute date? Pretty sure it does. Datetime date. That looks like it's correct to me. I mean, I'm using datetime date up here. Let's see. Not exactly sure what's going on here. Any Python experts out there know what's going on? Attribute error, datetime date, 2001. Is the format correctly? No, it's year, month, day. Year, month, day. That looks correct to me. Expected days? So here it's having a problem on line 46, the actual. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. The problem is actually back here. All right. Do you remember a moment ago when it first created this code, it had the string conversion logic in there? And I said, no, you don't need to put that in. So it said, oh, sure, I'll go ahead and remove it. Well, guess what? It didn't remove it from the string here. So it still says, oh, get the date out of the string. It's like, no, you don't need to do that. So I think what I can do is just remove that. So fingers crossed. Again, I'm not a Python guy. Oh, look at that. I guess I am a Python guy. All right. So it looks like all of my tests ran. And again, I'm so disappointed. These date ranges turned out to be correct. I was hoping to point out, inaccuracy in the test data, but there you go. All right. So that's fine. Okay. So hopefully you get a feeling for how the tools are the same and yet they're different here. Now, I don't really have enough time to demonstrate this one. There's another one that some people have told me about called Code Geeks. This is from a company called Zifu AI, if that's how you pronounce it. And this one actually scares me a little bit. So if you're concerned about privacy and being spied upon, all of these tools, well, except for, I guess all of these tools to a degree are going to rely on sending your code to a web service someplace. And I don't know where your code is going with this tool. Okay, so this is kind of the TikTok of AI assisted programming right here. So if you are concerned at all about the privacy of your code, then that's definitely something to think about. Okay. All right, so I'm going to skip over the demo on this one. The demo would have been very predictable anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this up with some overall observations here. Number one, you and I are going to be responsible for the generated code. None of these tools are going to take any kind of responsibility or liability for what's generated. Therefore, your job is safe. Now, one thing that you're still responsible for is all of the IDE setup and dependency management and things like that. You have to do that before these tools are effective. So for example, it actually took me a while to get Visual Studio Code working with Python, and I had to get the pip dependencies in. I had to set up an environment in Visual Studio Code, and I'm still not sure if that was a Visual Studio Code thing or a Python thing or a PyTest thing, but I had to do all of that stuff in order to get to the point where these tools could help me. So, and sometimes that's, a significant amount of work. With these tools, especially Code Whisperer and Copilot and Code Geeks, the keystrokes are everything. So definitely, if you're using these, take a moment to learn the keystrokes. It's definitely going to be worth your time. Also, be patient. That's a good one. If you have an old paperback of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, might want to dust that one off and reread that one. More code in the editor means you're going to have a chance of good suggestions. The reason my demos all started with an editor full of code with dates and with test logic, PyTest test logic, that was not an accident. I did that because I wanted to help these tools out. And you could see that the suggestions that I made were pretty relevant to what I was working on here. And I found that these are good at creating new code, not really good at modifying existing code, other than like adding a line here or two. That's just my general observation. Some larger issues to think about, though. The elephant in the room is privacy. So these tools all work on the basis of capturing your code, some snippets of your code, 100 lines down, above and below, maybe. And they make external API calls with them. So essentially, working with these tools is like doing some pair programming with an extremely intelligent contractor who has an extreme amount of intelligence, a photographic memory, and yet they have not signed your organization's non-disclosure agreement. So most companies that I have encountered would be uncomfortable with letting such a person on premises. let alone giving them access to your code. So that's something you have to think about. So I was teaching a class last week for a large bank, and for them this was a non-starter. It's like, well, we just can't do that. Certainly if you're working for something on the Department of Defense, at the current stage, these tools are not going to work. Maybe a year from now, maybe. Another interesting phenomenon is the concept of AI drift. This was actually documented over the summer by a couple of researchers. One was from UC Berkeley and the other was from across the bay at Stanford. And what they observed is, and they were specifically looking at ChatGPT. They hit it with a number of questions, related various questions like calculating prime numbers, a simple coding example, a question about real estate law, a couple of various things for ChatGPT. And then they came back 3 months later and they asked the same questions, and they found that ChatGPT had essentially become stupider, and it had produced inaccurate results previously in March, but then later in the summer, it had actually gotten worse. And so this is a phenomenon in artificial intelligence that is not really explainable right now, at least not with any articles that I've seen. Ownership and liability, again, this is the big one. You are going to be responsible for the code, so that's why your job is safe. Another thing you have to think about is code quality. I'm actually disappointed that my demonstration didn't highlight this, but the code that is generated is going to be based on a lot of things in open source libraries. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got some stuff checked into my GitHub public repositories that I wouldn't consider good example code for people to copy. And yet these tools are training off of that code. And so a lot of times mistakes and bad practices, will show up. Just an example, AWS SDKs for Java, there are a lot of examples out there for the version 1 of the SDK. I like to work with version 2 of the SDK. I ask it to generate some code. It invariably gives me older examples because that's what it knows. Okay. But to leave on an exciting, positive note, there's a lot of exciting possibilities. This is really a good time to be a programmer. One really interesting case here is generating automated tests for legacy code. So many times I teach the AWS DevOps course, and one of the things that holds people back from really embracing automated pipelines for legacy applications is knowing that it would take forever to generate sufficient code coverage. Well, now you actually have the possibility of really quickly generating some good test coverage. Now, again, you have to think about the quality of that, okay? Converting code from one language to another. A couple of months ago, I took some of my CloudFormation templates and I turned them into Terraform. And it did a pretty good job. That was ChatGPT. Developing expertise in other languages, I think it works pretty well. However, remember the code examples that it generates might not be state-of-the-art. For all I know, that little print with the F character in Python, maybe that was state-of-the-art back in Python 2.7, and maybe you're not supposed to do that anymore. I don't know. So it's nice that I have these suggestions, but I don't know if it's a good suggestion or not. And another really good use case is comprehending errors that you get, like Stack Overflow, except a lot quicker. Okay, before I take some questions and answers, just so you know, we have some recommended courses if you want to learn more about this. This one right here, this is a 5-day training course on generative AI engineering. See, I think I've got the page for it. You can go out to you can take a look at this in our ExitCertified catalog here. Just search for generative AI engineering training. It's one of many courses that we have. We have over 4,000 courses in our course catalog. So anytime you're looking for something, you can find it. The other one is if you are in the Azure camp, this is a really interesting one, I think very compelling, just as a 1-day course on generative AI solutions with Azure Open AI Service. So that one looks really good. Okay, Alexandra, I didn't see any questions coming up in the chat. So I think we're all clear on that.
Yeah, if anyone wants to throw a question into the chat, please feel free. I'm going to just go over a brief slide, and if anything comes through after that, we can certainly answer them. I just wanted to share, I know we're running a little bit over, but really briefly, I wanted to highlight our new exclusive savings program that we actually have. When you pre-purchase a certain amount on training for your team or perhaps your organization, you're going to earn prepaid training credits across ExitCertified, WebH Solutions, and ExitCertified. So you can see what the requirements are there for on this slide. And if you actually invest over 100,000, you will also gain access to 2 complimentary private webinars exclusively for your organization from the variety of topics that are shared on this slide. I'm actually going to share the link in the chat along with the 2 courses that Ken had just referenced, for you to just get a little bit more information. So with that said, I just wanted to go over that. If there weren't any other questions, Ken's email is at the beginning of this chat. So I suggest taking that down now so you can follow up if you do have any questions or concerns. And I guess I just want to say a big thank you to Ken for providing us with those in-depth demos and the live troubleshootings that you've done. And so for anyone that has joined the call late, this is completely recorded. This webinar is going to be sent out via email. So thank you all for joining today, and I hope you all have a great day.
And thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. We'll see you in the class sometime soon.
All right. Bye, everyone.